Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome the President and CEO of the College Board, David Coleman.
This is an exciting morning for me because I get to introduce two of the most powerful technologies on the Lord's earth. One is three extraordinary women who I'm about to talk about, and the second is a simple and beautiful idea: the systematic teaching of analytic writing. That is, the capacity to read something with care and then write about it clearly, to work through source material and care about things like accuracy and precision as you analyze that material. I'm saying it here right now. I'm going to take a stand. All of you who think MOOCs, iPads, blah, 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 are going to transform everything, let me say to you, the technology of interruption in our time has outpaced the technology of concentration. Do not look for flashy objects to transform the work that students do. They have a role to play as helpmates, but if we confuse technology with innovation, we will go badly wrong. The real innovation, in a funny way, is an ancient one, which Peg Tyre talks about in a remarkable article. You must read this. You know when you read a short story or a poem or an article and you say to a friend, "You've got to read this"? Read The Writing Revolution. When I read it after years, Peg Tyre is going to begin speaking today. And when I read it, it's about New Dorp High School, and it's about where we have two of the great teachers from that school from. A failing school that embraced the technology of throughout its classrooms. Because one thing about analytic writing is it shatters classroom boundaries, right? This is essential to the work of science, to analyze data and write about it, as it is to history of course and source documentation, as it is to literary study, as it is to every endeavor. So suddenly you have a technology where all the teachers can work together in concert and make it the core of college readiness. Wouldn't it be great if that College Board could look again at PSAT and SAT to make sure that analytic writing and those core skills were celebrated on that exam to get a lot more kids college and career ready? We'll take that idea into consideration too. So the news here is simple. A steely-minded reporter. Peg is hard to introduce because I find her a very intriguing figure. I met her when she interviewed me on a panel, and she was tough. And she's that kind of remarkable person, like great teachers, who does not give away an immediate warmth. But I just want to be rather clear, but as you talk to her more, and I think this was the experience of these teachers, and that the virtue of someone who really listens and whose caring is actually totally authentic is then a gradually transformational experience. And I find people like that who really care and who have really high standards and principles, when they do warm, when they do engage, it's quite a remarkable thing. And she wrote this article about the work these teachers did that in a failing high school turned around the performance of their kids. Think about how many myths this explodes. Our society comforts itself by saying that when a kid's in high school and they're behind, we cannot help them. It's too late. How often have you heard in polite conversation, after early childhood, it's over? Like, how many people have heard that kind of remark? After middle school, it's over. After this, it's over. What if there were a technology that through intense practice actually could accelerate kids later in the game? You may say, prove this technology to me. Well, the best proponents of a new technology are the teachers whose hands it was in. I heard this story this morning, it kind of blew my mind. One of the teachers told me this morning, together speaking with Trevor, and I just got to say that anyone who has a mind crush of Trevor Packer and Stephanie Sanford at the same time, as much as Peg Tyre and her teachers, is a pretty impressive group of people. And Trevor was working with the teachers this morning, and they discovered that years ago, in this same high school, when they taught AP US history, 2, I believe, out of 33 classroom members got a 3 or higher on US history. As they did this work with kids, guess how many? Dare guess, out of 33. 22. That's like, I can't do percentages that fast. That's like a zillion percent or whatever. That's a kind of growth that is startling. That is a breakthrough technology in action. And will you please join me celebrating not only remarkable people, but a remarkable idea that this College Board is determined to distribute to all kids in this country. The power of writing well, analyzing sources in such a way that we can advance them. Thank you so much for being here, Peg. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try and work on my immediate warmth, okay? Really, I'm not that harsh. I want to talk, thank you very much for coming out this morning. I want to talk to you today a little bit about how I came to write a piece for The Atlantic on analytic writing. Let me see if I can make this happen. Hopefully you'll be seeing that soon. It's a serious piece. And despite the fact that it has nothing to do with Miley Cyrus, it got about 20,000 Facebook likes, and it generated a big electronic debate, a fulsome electronic debate in The Atlantic. It was a finalist for a National Magazine Award, and it won first place from the Education Writers Association. I'm the author of several best-selling books on education and a journalist, and I'm also director of strategy at the Edwin Gould Foundation. And there we focus on getting low-income kids to and through college. And in those capacities, I see what you see, that when it comes to English language arts, the achievement of low-income and many middle-income children remains stubbornly low. And you see the effects of that low achievement on college application rates, enrollment, and on retention. Low-income and many middle-income students don't have the ability to express complex thinking in their speaking and in their writing, and it hurts them. So what's going on? So my question is, what was going on? So we know that poor kids come into kindergarten speaking fewer words and having fewer pre-literacy type experiences. And once they get to school, I see what you see. And that is in the very early years, poor kids progress like middle-class kids and affluent kids in reading. Teachers are doing a great job teaching them to decode. And then comes 4th grade, and for a lot of kids, their progress begins to flatline. And what happens is, for affluent kids, they make the transition from learning to read to reading to learn. So they go from being able to sound out words like, sound out words and then read an informational text, or maybe their history textbook about geography, and they read about the Everglades, and then they read those paragraphs and they understand something about the swamps in Florida. But poor kids and many middle-class kids aren't making that transition effectively. They're reading the words, but they're not learning to extract meaning from words like affluent kids. Their comprehension is not keeping pace, and they fall further and further behind. So then this problem puts itself on your doorstep, right? Because then you're looking for candidates who can do post-secondary level work, and you're looking for low-income children and many middle-income children who have the preparation. And when you look at what their skills are, you realize they don't have what they need to actually do college-level work. So knowing these downstream effects, knowing what you go through, I was mindful of this, and for years I I grappled with this question, looking at the data from 4th grade, this K through 12 pipeline, looking at the data, looking at the plateaus. Why does this happen? Why does this happen, I asked myself. What do affluent kids get that a lot of middle class and low income kids don't get? And how do we give it to them? So a few years ago, I got a fellowship at Columbia University, and there I got a chance to look at research. And I looked at Jean Shaw and Harton Risley and Marilyn Jager Adams and Catherine Snow, and I looked at big replicated studies around literacy going back 20, 30, 40 years. I get a chance to visit with neuroscientists who are looking at our brain and how we learn to understand and to communicate. And the more I read, and the more people I talked to, the more upset I got. I came to see that there's a big problem in American schools. So what am I talking about? So imagine if we had a cure for cancer that involved giving people a combination of 3 drugs, and we were giving the cancer-ridden children of affluent families the 3 drugs, and they were getting better. But poor kids and some middle-class kids, we were only giving them the 1 drug. And it made them look a little better for a few years. They didn't look as pale and skinny as they were, but most of them remained ill. And they suffered from the debilitating effects of that illness their entire life. So what am I talking about? Let me be specific. I came to believe that somewhere along the line, there's been a big misunderstanding about literacy. Somewhere along the line, we began to think that teaching children to decode was the same as making them literate. The idea, which has taken flower in our schools, is that we teach children to read, and we expect them to read more and more, and then they'll start to read, and then around 4th grade, they'll start reading to learn. But the research tells us it doesn't work that way. That reading is not about learning to decode words, that true literacy is a rope with 4 strands: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Affluent kids, they get this. They hear a lot of words, they speak a lot of words at home. In school, they practice listening and speaking in ways that help them develop clarity and complexity. Their educated parents demand that their children's teachers not only teach them to read, but expose them to more and more complex texts in a way that builds vocabulary. Those children learn to construct growing vocabulary into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into essays. And you know what happens in schools that educate those affluent students? Children learn to extract ideas from complex reading material, and they can reflect that complexity. They can argue and persuade and grapple with ideas in speaking and in writing. What we see in those schools is that reading, writing, speaking, and listening scaffold the development of complex thought. But in low-income and many middle-income schools, children are not coming from language-rich environments. Teachers in those schools teach decoding, and then they try and teach a bunch of comprehension in a bunch of ways that don't really seem to make any sense to me. They teach comprehension as a set of skills removed from meaning. And I go into these classrooms and I find myself respectful but scratching my head. And speaking and listening skills, forget it. You go into low-income schools, and what you see is the teachers doing all the talking. They say, Abraham Lincoln was a president during the Civil War, right? Right? And the kids go, uh-huh. And he had to deal with a powerful downturn in the economy, right? Right? And the kids go, uh-huh. Right? The teachers are doing all the talking. And writing, when it is taught at all, revolves around personal narrative, expressing powerful emotions. In most schools I'm in, children are never taught to harness those powerful emotions to powerful sentences. And when you meet these low-income children in high schools, children who have sat in public school classrooms for 13 years, I mean, I don't want to sound harsh, but I often don't see a lot of evidence of complex thinking. They don't read well, they don't speak well, and they don't write well. And you know what happens the year after they graduate? The world gets even harsher than I am because potential employers look at them and they don't see a lot of evidence of complex thinking either. So as a journalist, I was itching to tell the story. It seemed to me like one of the most important of my career. But what editor is going to publish a story about cognition? Or worse yet, grammar? It just makes me sweaty, the whole concept of grammar. It's just a hard sell. It's a buzzkill. No one wants to read that. So I ruminated on this for a while, a couple of years, and then the Common Core standards were released. And when I read them, I saw that I wasn't the only one who saw this problem in American schools. That unknown to me, other people had been thinking about the same issue, and they were now making it mandatory that teachers begin addressing these shortfalls. So I was presented with this great and highly unlikely moment to write a story like this, because my reading of the Common Core suggested that a lot of teachers would be looking around for ways to expand their slender definition of literacy. So I set out to find a way to write about what was essentially cognition, how writing and speaking and reading, of course, deepens thinking. And I found the vehicle for my story at New Dorp. You'll see, it was a troubled school, and many of the children who came into this school were years behind in grade level in reading. The prognosis for these patients, frankly, was not good. But at this school, they formalized listening and speaking as exercises in all subjects. They also imported a program of explicit writing instruction, which was perfected by Dr. Judith Hochman, who's here today as my guest. She developed her writing program and field tested it in a school for children with language-based disabilities. In her work, she saw what separated kids with learning disabilities from general education mainstream kids is that LD kids were not less capable, they just needed to be taught in a different way. They needed overt, orderly instruction that assumes nothing. It is key to know this. Her instruction did not depend on kids absorbing knowledge about language from their environment. Now, the principal of New